Imagine standing in a hall of absolute silence. Your heart has just been removed from your chest, and it now rests on a golden scale. On the other side sits a single white feather. If your heart is heavier, a creature waiting in the shadows will devour it, and you will simply cease to exist forever. This was not a nightmare. For 3,000 years, this was the destiny every Egyptian prepared for, their entire lives. A world ruled by gods who were born from a dark ocean of nothing. Gods who created the sun, murdered their own brothers, and built the most powerful divine dynasty the ancient world has ever known. Today, we trace that bloodline to its very roots, every birth, every betrayal, every god. This is the complete family tree of the Egyptian gods. Welcome to Splinters of Time.
Before anything existed, there was only none. Not a god in the traditional sense, but something far more ancient. None was the primordial ocean of chaos itself, dark, infinite, motionless, and without form. He was not a creator. He was the raw material from which all creation would eventually emerge. In the city of Hermopolis, Nun was considered one of 8 primordial forces called the Ogdoad, paired with his female counterpart, Naunet, who together represented the primeval waters. Every Egyptian creation story, regardless of which city told it, agreed on one thing. Everything came from Nun, and according to ancient belief, at the end of time, everything will return to him. If Nun was the chaos before creation, Apep was the chaos that never accepted creation. A colossal serpent so enormous that ancient Egyptians described him as stretching the entire length of the Nile. Apep, also known by his Greek name Apophis, was the embodiment of darkness, destruction, and disorder. He had no mother, no father, no family. He simply existed in the waters of chaos with one single purpose: to destroy Ra and drag the entire universe back into eternal darkness. Every single night as Ra traveled through the underworld on his solar boat, Apep was waiting. He would attack, he would be defeated, and the next night he would rise again. This cycle never ended. Apep was the only god in the entire Egyptian pantheon that was never prayed to. Instead, Egyptian priests performed rituals against him, burning wax figures of the serpent and reciting spells to help Ra survive another night. Note, 2 competing origin accounts exist for Apep in the academic record. One version holds that he was born from Ra's own umbilical cord, while the other describes him as having emerged from the spittle of the goddess Neith. Both versions appear in legitimate scholarly sources. Aten is one of the most fascinating and unusual gods in the entire Egyptian pantheon, because his story is not just about mythology. It is about a political and religious revolution. For most of Egyptian history, Aten was simply the physical disk of the sun, considered a minor aspect of the great sun god Ra. He had no myths, no family, no stories. He was just the disk. But then came a pharaoh named Amenhotep IV. This pharaoh renamed himself Akhenaten, meaning effective spirit of the Aten, moved the entire capital of Egypt to a brand new city, and declared that Aten was not simply the greatest god, but the only god. He closed the temples of all other gods, erased the name of Amun from monuments across the country, and declared himself the sole intermediary between Aten and all of humanity. It was one of the earliest attempts at monotheism in recorded history. But when Akhenaten died, the priests and the people immediately dismantled everything he had built. His city was abandoned, his name was erased from history, and the old gods returned. Aten went back to being a minor deity and stayed that way forever. Note, whether Atenism constituted true monotheism or simply henotheism, the elevation of one god above others, while not denying the existence of the rest, remains an active debate among Egyptologists and scholars of religion. Ra was the sun god, the king of all gods, and the first pharaoh of the divine world. He emerged from the primordial waters of none, either through an act of self-creation or from a lotus flower that bloomed on the primeval mound. No mother, no father. He simply was. Ra ruled over the sky, the earth, and the underworld, and every single pharaoh in Egyptian history claimed to be his son. During the day, Ra sailed across the sky in his solar boat, bringing light and life to the world. But when the sun set, his journey did not end. He descended into the underworld, where he battled Apep every single night, fighting to ensure the sun would rise again the next morning. Ra also had 3 forms that represented different stages of the sun. Khepri, the scarab beetle, represented the rising sun at dawn. Ra himself represented the sun at its peak at midday, and Atum represented the setting sun at dusk. Over time, as other gods rose to power, Ra merged with them. He became Amun-Ra, the king of kings. He became Ra-Harakti, the horizon god. Ra was so fundamental to Egyptian religion that almost every major god eventually became a version of him. Note, the precise account of Ra's emergence varies depending on the source. In some versions, he arose spontaneously from the waters of none, while in others he emerged from a lotus flower blooming atop the primordial mound. Both accounts appear across legitimate Egyptian religious texts. While Ra was the god of the sun at its peak, Atum was something older and more complete. His name literally means completion, or to finish. He was the self-created god of Heliopolis, the first solid being to rise from the waters of none, standing on the primeval mound called the Benben. Atum did not need a mother or a father. He created himself. And then, out of loneliness, he created the first 2 gods from his own body. Through an act of self-creation, he produced Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. These 2 children wandered off into the dark primeval waters and became lost. Atum, unable to bear the loss, sent his eye out into the chaos to find them. When they were finally returned to him, he wept with joy, and according to some myths, his tears became the first human beings. Over time, Atum merged with Ra, becoming Atum-Ra, and his role shifted. Where Ra represented the rising and midday sun, Atum became the setting sun, the aged god who descends into the underworld at dusk, completing the cycle of the day. Note, the accounts of how Atum created Shu and Tefnut vary across sources. Some texts describe him spitting them into existence, others attribute their creation to a sneeze, and still others describe an act of self-fertilization. All 3 versions appear in legitimate Egyptian religious texts. Montu was the falcon-headed war god of Thebes, one of Egypt's most ancient warrior deities and the original patron of the city before Amun displaced him, his name meaning nomad, reflecting his nature as a restless, conquering force. Originally a manifestation of Ra's scorching, destructive heat, he evolved into the divine embodiment of the pharaoh's military fury on the battlefield. Egypt's greatest warrior kings called themselves Mighty Bull, son of Montu, and Montu of the 2 lands, and Rameses II at the Battle of Kadesh was said to have raged at them like Montu, lord of Thebes. The 11th dynasty pharaohs who reunified Egypt after the chaos of the first intermediate period chose him as their dynastic god, naming themselves Mentuhotep, Montu is satisfied, crediting him with their victories. He was depicted as a falcon-headed man with a solar disk and double plumes, armed with a curved sword, spear, and bow, and also took the form of the sacred Bukis bull, a white bull with a black snout worshipped at Armant. 4 great temple complexes honored him around Thebes, and Egyptian armies marched under the banner of the 4 Montes, his image trampling enemies with a spear, a divine warlord who turned the chaos of war into an extension of Maat. If Ra was the original king of the gods, Amun was the god who eventually took that throne. His name means the Hidden One, and unlike most Egyptian gods who were visible and tangible, Amun was invisible. Like the wind, you could feel him but never see him. Amun started as a minor local deity in the city of Thebes, one of the 8 primordial gods of the Ogdoad, paired with his early consort Amunet. For centuries he was relatively unimportant, but as Thebes grew in power and became the capital of a unified Egypt, Amun grew with it. When Pharaoh Ahmose I drove the foreign Hyksos invaders out of Egypt around the 16th century before the Common Era, he credited Amun for the victory, and from that moment, Amun's rise was unstoppable. He merged with Ra to become Amun-Ra, the king of all gods, the lord of heaven and earth. His temple at Karnak became the largest religious structure ever built in human history. During the New Kingdom, the priests of Amun became so powerful that they essentially controlled the country alongside the pharaohs. Amun had a wife named Mut, and together with their son Khonsu, the moon god, they formed the Theban Triad, the divine family of Thebes. Note, competing accounts exist regarding Amun's origins. In the Hermopolitan tradition, he was one of the 8 primordial deities of the Ogdoad, while in the Theban tradition, he was a self-created god who existed before all others. Both traditions coexisted in parallel for thousands of years without either displacing the other. Mut's name means simply mother, and that single word captured everything she was. She was the wife of Amun, the mother of the moon god Khonsu, and together the 3 of them formed the Theban Triad, the divine family at the heart of Egypt's most powerful city. But Mut was far more than just a wife and mother. In some of the oldest Egyptian texts, she was described as a primordial goddess who emerged from the waters of Nun with no mother and no father, and gave birth to the first gods of the world entirely on her own. As Amun rose to become the king of all gods, Mut rose with him, becoming the queen of all gods. She absorbed the identities of other goddesses over time, including Sekhmet, Hathor, Bastet, and Isis, until she was considered the one great mother goddess from whom all other goddesses were simply different faces. She was usually depicted as a woman wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, holding the Ankh, the symbol of life, in her hand. Note, Mut's precise origins remain unclear in the textual record. Some sources present her as a self-created primordial goddess who existed before all others, while other versions identify her as the daughter of Ra and the consort of Amun. Both characterizations appear across legitimate Egyptian religious sources. Hathor was one of the oldest and most beloved goddesses in all of Egyptian history, with worship dating back nearly 5,000 years. She was the goddess of love, beauty, music, joy, fertility, and motherhood, but she also had a fierce and destructive side. Her name literally means House of Horus, and she was considered the daughter of Ra and the wife of Horus, making her the symbolic mother of every pharaoh who ever ruled Egypt. When Ra grew old and humanity began to mock him, it was Hathor he sent to punish them. She transformed into a lioness and began slaughtering people across the land, drunk on blood and impossible to stop. Ra eventually tricked her by flooding the fields with red-dyed beer. She drank it, fell into a deep sleep, and woke up as the gentle, loving Hathor once again. Humanity was saved. She was usually depicted as a woman with the horns of a cow holding the sun disk between them, or simply as a cow herself, a symbol of nourishment and the sky. Note, Hathor's relationship to Ra shifts depending on the source. Some texts describe her as his daughter, others as his wife, and still others as his mother. This kind of apparent contradiction is entirely typical of Egyptian theology, where the same deity could hold multiple simultaneous relationships to another without any perceived inconsistency. Sekhmet's name means the powerful one, and no name in the entire Egyptian pantheon was more fitting. She was the daughter of Ra, the goddess of war, fire, plague and destruction, depicted as a woman with the head of a lioness and a sun disk above her head. She breathed fire, and the hot winds of the desert were said to be her breath. But Sekhmet had two sides. She was just as capable of healing as she was of destroying. Her priests became the physicians of Egypt, and she was believed to hold the cure for every disease she could also cause. Her most famous story is the one we already heard in Hathor's section. When humanity stopped following the laws of Ra, he sent Sekhmet to punish them. She descended upon the earth and began slaughtering everyone in sight, bathing in blood and refusing to stop even when Ra ordered her to. Ra poured 7,000 jars of red-dyed beer across the land. Sekhmet drank it all, believing it was blood, fell into a deep sleep and woke up calm. She was the wife of Ptah, the god of craftsmen, and together they had a son named Nefertum, the god of the lotus flower and the sunrise. Note, the relationship between Hathor and Sekhmet is presented inconsistently across the sources. Some texts treat them as alternate forms of the same goddess, one gentle, one destructive, while others present them as entirely separate deities with distinct identities and cult centers. Both interpretations appear in legitimate Egyptian religious texts. Bastet is one of the most beloved goddesses in all of Egyptian history, worshipped for over 5,000 years, from the earliest dynasties all the way through the Roman period. She was the daughter of Ra, the goddess of protection, joy, fertility, and the home, depicted as a slender woman with the head of a cat carrying a sistrum, which is a type of rattle used in music and ritual. But Bastet did not always look like a gentle cat. In her earliest form, she was a fierce lioness goddess, nearly identical to her sister Sekhmet, a warrior deity who protected the pharaoh in battle. Over time, as Egypt evolved and domestic cats became beloved household companions, Bastet softened, transforming into the calm, nurturing goddess of the home and family. Every night she was believed to transform back into a cat and stand guard over her father Ra, protecting him from the chaos serpent Apep in the underworld. Her city of Bubastis became one of the most celebrated places in Egypt, and her annual festival attracted hundreds of thousands of people who traveled by boat down the Nile to celebrate her with music, dancing, and great quantities of wine. Note: the relationship between Bastet and Sekhmet is treated inconsistently across the sources. Some texts present them as entirely separate goddesses with distinct identities, cult centers, and functions, while others describe them as two aspects of the same divine force, one embodying gentle protection, the other destructive fury. Both interpretations appear in legitimate Egyptian religious texts. Ma'at was unlike any other god in the Egyptian pantheon because she was not just a goddess, but a law. She personified truth, justice, balance, and cosmic order, the principles that held the entire universe together. Her name meant that which is straight, and she was depicted as a woman wearing a single ostrich feather on her head, sometimes with wings spread wide. She was the daughter of Ra, and, according to creation mythology, Ra could only rise from the primordial waters of Nun after he had first set Ma'at in place, establishing order before anything else could exist. Every pharaoh was required to rule in accordance with Ma'at, and the chief judge of Egypt was called the priest of Ma'at, while court officials wore small golden images of her as a symbol of their sworn duty to fairness. But Ma'at's most famous role came after death. In the Hall of Two Truths, deep within the underworld, the heart of every person who died was placed on a scale and weighed against Ma'at's single feather. If the heart was light with virtue, the soul passed into paradise. If it was heavy with sin and wrongdoing, a terrifying creature called Ammit, part lion, part hippopotamus, and part crocodile, devoured the heart on the spot, and the soul ceased to exist forever. Shu was one of the very first gods to ever exist, the son of Atum, created at the dawn of creation itself. He was the god of air, light, and the space between heaven and earth, depicted as a man wearing one or more ostrich feathers on his head, often shown kneeling with his arms raised, holding the sky above him. Along with his sister and wife Tefnut, goddess of moisture, Shu was created directly from Atum's own body, making them the first divine couple in Egyptian mythology. Together they had 2 children, Geb, the god of the earth, and Nut, the goddess of the sky. But Geb and Nut were so deeply in love that they could not be separated, locked in an eternal embrace that left no room for anything else in the universe. So Shu stepped between them, lifting Nut up into the sky with his outstretched arms and pressing Geb down toward the earth below, creating the space in between where all life could exist. The Egyptians believed that if Shu ever let go, if the sky ever collapsed back down to the earth, all of creation would end instantly. Note, the method by which Shu and Tefnut were created varies from text to text. Some sources describe their origin through an act of self-fertilization, others through spitting, and still others through a sneeze. All 3 versions appear across legitimate Egyptian religious texts and reflect the typical coexistence of parallel creation traditions. Tefnut was Shu's twin sister and wife, the goddess of moisture, rain, and dew, created alongside him from Atum's own body at the beginning of time. She was depicted as a woman with the head of a lioness wearing a sun disk and Uraeus serpent on her head. And together with Shu, she was worshipped as one of the twin lions, 2 powerful forces that balanced each other at the edges of the world. One of the most dramatic stories involving Tefnut tells of how she quarreled with Ra and fled Egypt entirely, retreating into the deserts of Nubia in the form of a raging lioness. Without Tefnut's moisture, all of Egypt began to dry up and wither, and Ra sent both Shu and the wise god Thoth to bring her back. Only after Thoth's persuasion did Tefnut agree to return, and when she arrived back in Egypt, her return was celebrated with great joy and feasting. She also played a role in protecting Ra from the chaos serpent Apep, and is listed in the Egyptian Book of the Dead as one of the goddesses who guards the gates of the underworld. Khonsu was the god of the moon, time, and healing, the son of Amun and Mut, and the 3rd member of the Theban triad, the sacred divine family of Thebes. His name meant the traveler, referring to the moon's nightly journey across the sky, and he was depicted as a young man wrapped in mummy bandages, wearing a sidelock of youth on his shaved head and a crescent moon cradling a full lunar disk above him. As a god of time, Khonsu helped mark the months and seasons, and because the moon was believed to influence fertility, he was also credited with helping women conceive children and animals multiply. But Khonsu had a healing power that became legendary across the ancient world. One famous story recorded on the walls of his temple tells of a foreign king from a distant land whose daughter was possessed by a demon. When all other remedies failed, the king sent to Egypt and begged for a statue of Khonsu to be brought to his kingdom. The moment the statue arrived, the demon was driven out and the princess was healed. Yet the earliest texts describe a far darker Khonsu, appearing in the ancient pyramid texts as a bloodthirsty deity who helped the dead pharaoh hunt and devour other gods to absorb their power. Note, Khonsu's early bloodthirsty character underwent a complete transformation over time, evolving by the new kingdom into the gentle and benevolent son of Amun and Mut. This dramatic shift stands as one of the most striking examples of how Egyptian religion reinvented itself across thousands of years, absorbing, softening, and rewriting the identities of its own gods without erasing what came before. Ptah was one of the most ancient and powerful gods in all of Egypt, the patron deity of craftsmen, architects, sculptors, and all who create with their hands. He was depicted as a mummified man with green skin and a shaved head, standing rigidly upright and holding a combined scepter that united the symbols of life, power, and stability in a single staff. But Ptah was far more than just a patron of craftsmen. According to the Memphite theology, one of the oldest religious texts in the ancient world, Ptah was the original creator of everything, who formed the entire universe not through physical action, but through thought and speech alone. He conceived of all things in his heart, and then spoke them into existence with his tongue, making him perhaps the most intellectually sophisticated creator god in all of Egyptian religion. From Memphis, his city and cult center, his worship spread across all of Egypt, and his temple there became so famous that the Greeks called the city by a name derived from that temple, Hikapta, the house of the soul of Ptah, which eventually became the word we use today, Egypt. He was the husband of Sekhmet and father of Nefertem, forming the Memphite triad, and he was also regarded as the divine father of the architect Imhotep, who was later deified as a god of medicine. Not every god in the Egyptian pantheon was born from Egyptian soil. Kadesh was a goddess who originated in the ancient lands of Syria and Canaan, and was brought into Egypt during the New Kingdom period, roughly around the year 1500 before the Common Era, when Egypt's empire expanded and its trade routes opened to the wider ancient world. Her name derived from a Semitic root meaning holy or blessed, and she was the goddess of nature, beauty, and sacred pleasure, depicted in a way that was immediately recognizable as foreign. Unlike almost every Egyptian deity who was always shown in profile, Kadesh was depicted facing directly forward, completely nude, standing on the back of a lion, holding lotus flowers in one hand and serpents in the other. She was worshipped as part of a triad alongside the Egyptian fertility god Min and the Syrian war god Reshep, standing between them as the powerful center of this unusual divine trio. Over time, the Egyptians associated her with their own goddess Hathor, giving her Hathor's crown of cow horns and sun disk, until she became fully absorbed into the Egyptian religious world. Her titles were extraordinary, including Mistress of all the gods, Lady of the stars of heaven, and Eye of Ra without equal. Note: modern Egyptologists continue to debate the precise cultural origin of Kadesh. Some scholars view her as a goddess imported directly from Syria, while others argue she was an original Egyptian creation heavily influenced by Canaanite iconography and developed locally during the New Kingdom period of intense cross-cultural contact. The question remains open in the academic literature. Just as Kadesh came to Egypt from the ancient Near East, so did Reshep, the god of war, plague, and fire. He was one of the oldest and most widely worshipped deities across the ancient world, with origins stretching back to the city of Ebla in Syria over 4,000 years ago, and evidence of his worship found from Mesopotamia all the way to Spain. His name meant flame or burning in the Semitic languages, and he was depicted as a bearded warrior wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt with a gazelle head mounted at the front, holding an axe or spear in one hand and a shield or the Ankh symbol in the other. He was brought into Egypt most likely by the Hyksos, the foreign rulers who conquered Egypt, and by the time of Pharaoh Amenhotep II, Reshep had become so respected that the pharaoh erected a stele near the Great Sphinx at Giza, showing Reshep standing watch over him as he prepared his horses for war. Together with Kadesh and the fertility god Min, he formed a divine triad, a strange and powerful trio combining war, plague, love, and fertility in one. He could send disease with his fiery arrows, but he could also be called upon to protect against it. And magical texts survive in which priests invoke Reshep to destroy a demon called Akka that was believed to cause stomach pains. Note: scholars continue to debate whether Reshep entered the Egyptian pantheon through the Hyksos during their occupation of the Delta, or whether earlier trade relationships between Egypt and the Levant had already introduced his cult before the Hyksos period. The question remains unresolved in the academic literature. Taweret was one of the most unusual-looking gods in all of Egypt, and one of the most beloved. Her name meant the Great Female, and she was the goddess of childbirth, pregnancy, and the protection of mothers and newborns. She was depicted as a terrifying composite creature standing upright on her hind legs, with the head and swollen belly of a pregnant hippopotamus, the paws of a lion, the back of a crocodile, drooping human breasts, and a woman's hair. She sometimes carried a knife in one hand to drive away evil spirits. Every animal that made up her body was chosen deliberately, because each of them was a creature the Egyptians both feared and respected as a fierce, unstoppable protector of its young. Devourer was not a goddess of the pharaohs or the royal court. She had no great official temples and no state religion built around her. She was a household goddess, and her image appeared everywhere ordinary Egyptians lived and worked, painted on furniture, carved on headrests and cosmetic jars, and worn as amulets by pregnant women who pressed her image to their bodies during labor. Even during the reign of Akhenaten, when the pharaoh banned nearly all the old gods and replaced them with the single worship of the Aten, ordinary people continued to secretly keep small Taweret amulets in their homes, refusing to give her up. Note: ancient sources are inconsistent regarding Taweret's consort. Some texts identify her companion as the chaos serpent Apep, while others associate her with the crocodile god Sobek or the protective dwarf deity Bez. This inconsistency reflects her incorporation into different mythological contexts across various periods of Egyptian history, rather than a single unified tradition. If Taweret was the fierce protector of mothers during childbirth, Bez was her companion in that sacred and dangerous work. He was one of the strangest-looking gods in the entire Egyptian pantheon, depicted as a bow-legged dwarf with the mane and ears of a lion, a large belly, and an enormous feathered crown, always shown sticking out his tongue and pulling grotesque faces. Unlike almost every other Egyptian god who was depicted in profile, Bes faced directly forward, which was itself a message. He was not standing to the side watching. He was looking straight at whatever evil dared approach, ready to fight it. His name most likely came from the word Besa, meaning to protect, and protection was precisely what he offered. He was a god of childbirth, households, music, dance, children, and fertility. He had no great temples, no formal priesthood, no official state cult. Instead, his image appeared everywhere ordinary people lived, carved on bed frames and headrests, painted on the walls of birthing rooms, worn as amulets by pregnant women, even tattooed on the thighs of dancers and musicians. When a baby smiled or laughed for no reason, the Egyptians said it was because Bez was nearby making funny faces. His worship spread far beyond Egypt, reaching Syria, Spain, and eventually the entire Roman Empire, where soldiers adopted him as a military mascot and wore his image on their armor. Note, the precise origin of Bez remains debated among scholars. The theory that he originated in Nubia or the region of ancient Somalia represents the most widely held view, but no definitive mythological origin story has ever been identified in the ancient sources, leaving his cultural roots an open question in Egyptology. Every god we have met so far was born divine, emerging from chaos or from the bodies of other gods. Imhotep was different. He was born a commoner, a real human being who lived around the year 2650 before the Common Era, and he rose through his extraordinary genius to become the most celebrated man in Egypt other than the pharaoh himself. He served King Djoser of the Third Dynasty as chancellor, high priest, chief architect, and chief physician, holding titles that essentially made him the prime minister of the entire country. His greatest achievement was the Step Pyramid of Saqqara, the first large structure ever built entirely from cut stone in human history, a towering monument of 6 massive stone steps that still stands today after nearly 5,000 years. He may also have been the world's first physician to approach illness through observation and diagnosis rather than magic alone, and ancient medical texts attributed to him described over 200 different diseases and their treatments. After his death, the Egyptian people began to worship him as a demigod almost immediately. 2,000 years later, around 525 before the Common Era, he was elevated to full divinity and replaced the god Nefertem in the great Memphis Triad, becoming the divine son of Ptah and Sekhmet. His temples became hospitals, where thousands of sick pilgrims traveled from across the ancient world to sleep in his presence and pray that he would reveal a cure to them in their dreams. Note, whether Imhotep genuinely contributed to the medical texts attributed to him remains a matter of scholarly debate. Some academics argue that the works bearing his name were composed in later periods and retroactively attributed to him as his divine reputation grew, making it difficult to distinguish historical authorship from posthumous legend. After the fierce power of Sekhmet and the creative genius of Ptah, their son Nefertem was something entirely different. His name meant the Beautiful One, and he was the god of the blue lotus flower, of perfume, of healing, and of the first light of dawn. According to creation mythology, at the very beginning of time, before anything else existed, a single blue lotus flower rose from the dark primordial waters of Nun, and from its petals emerged the first sunlight. Nefertem was that lotus, and he was that moment. The Egyptian Book of the Dead contains a prayer that says, "Rise like Nefertem from the blue water lily to the nostrils of Ra, and come forth upon the horizon each day, linking his rebirth to the daily rebirth of the sun itself." He was depicted as a beautiful young man wearing a large blue lotus flower as his crown, sometimes holding a curved saber or an ankh, and sometimes shown as a lion or with a lion's head, reflecting the fierce energy inherited from his mother. Perfume in ancient Egypt was not a luxury, but a sacred science, and Nefertem was the divine patron of all aromatic arts. The blue lotus was used extensively in healing rituals, and its scent was believed to carry protective and restorative powers. One particularly celebrated ancient sculpture, found in the tomb of Tutankhamun, depicts the young pharaoh's head emerging from a lotus flower, identifying him directly with Nefertem and the promise of eternal dawn. While most mythologies around the world give us a sky father and an earth mother, ancient Egypt did something unexpected. Here, the earth was male. Geb was the god of the earth, son of Shu, the air god, and Tefnut, the moisture goddess, grandson of Atum himself. He and his sister Nut, the sky goddess, were born locked in a tight embrace, their bodies so intertwined that no space existed between earth and sky, and no life could emerge. Their father Shu had to forcibly separate them, lifting Nut high above while Geb remained below, and the air between them became the atmosphere we breathe. Geb was so heartbroken by this separation that he wept, and his tears, according to myth, formed the oceans of the world. He was depicted as a reclining man, sometimes colored green with vegetation growing from his body, his bent knee echoing the shape of hills and valleys, and his sacred animal was the goose, because the hieroglyph for his name was a goose, and some myths connected him to Gengenwer, the cosmic creator goose said to have laid the egg from which the sun was born. As god of the earth, Geb controlled whether crops grew or failed, and earthquakes were said to be his laughter. He also had a dark side. The earth was the grave, and Geb could imprison the souls of the dead within him, which is why ancient funerary texts warned dead kings not to enter Geb's house. Together, Geb and Nut produced the next generation of gods, Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Nephthys, making Geb the grandfather of Horus and the divine ancestor of every pharaoh who ever ruled Egypt. Nut was the goddess of the sky, depicted as a woman arching her star-covered body from horizon to horizon, with Geb the earth lying beneath her and Shu the air holding them apart for eternity. Every evening she swallowed the sun, god Ra, carried him safely through her body during the night, and gave birth to him again at dawn, making her the engine of the cosmic cycle. Ra cursed her never to give birth on any day of the calendar year, but the god Thoth gambled with the moon and won 5 extra days, and on those 5 intercalary days, Nut gave birth to Osiris, Horus the Elder, Seth, Isis, and Nephthys. Unlike most gods, she had no dedicated temples, but her presence was everywhere, painted on the inner lids of coffins and across tomb ceilings. Her star-filled body stretched protectively over the dead, promising resurrection just as the sun rose each morning from her womb. Babi was the deification of the Hamadrya's baboon, and his name meant bull of the baboons, roughly translating as chief of the baboons. He was one of the darker figures in the Egyptian pantheon, bloodthirsty, unpredictable, and said to feed on the entrails and souls of the sinful dead. Considered a firstborn son of Osiris, he stood guard in the underworld beside a lake of fire, and when a soul was judged unworthy during the weighing of the heart ceremony, it was Babi who devoured it. Baboons were also associated in ancient Egypt with high sexual energy, so Babi became the god of virility of the dead, with Old Kingdom texts describing his phallus as the doorbolt to the gates of heaven. Note: Babi's role as devourer of souls was later largely absorbed by the hybrid monster Ammit, and his worship eventually declined as Thoth's cult grew dominant in the same cult center at Khemunu. Min was one of Egypt's oldest gods, with a cult dating back to the pre-dynastic period around 4000 BCE, making him among the most ancient deities in the entire pantheon. He was the god of male fertility, sexual potency, and the harvest, and his iconography was completely unmistakable. A mummiform man standing upright with an erect phallus, holding a flail, wearing a double-plumed crown, with skin painted black to represent the fertile Nile soil. His sacred plant was the long leaf lettuce, which the Egyptians considered an aphrodisiac because when cut, it released a milky white sap, and lettuce was ritually offered to Min and then eaten by men hoping to increase their potency. His main cult centers were Coptos and Akhmim in Upper Egypt, where great public festivals celebrated his coming forth with processions, offerings, and games involving men climbing tall poles. During the New Kingdom, he merged with Amun to become Amun-Min, and the Greeks later equated him with their god Pan, even renaming his city Panopolis. Isis was the goddess of magic, healing, and motherhood, and she became the single most popular deity in all of Egyptian history, with her worship eventually spreading across the entire Roman Empire, from Britain to Afghanistan. Her name likely meant throne, and she was depicted as a beautiful woman wearing a throne hieroglyph or a solar disk and cow horns on her head. The central myth of Egyptian religion belongs to her. When her husband Osiris was murdered and dismembered by his brother Seth, Isis searched all of Egypt to gather the scattered pieces of his body, reassembled him, wrapped him in linen, and used her magic to resurrect him long enough to conceive their son Horus, who would grow up to reclaim the throne. Her magical power was said to surpass that of every other god, including Ra himself. Early Christians absorbed her iconography so completely that ancient images of Isis nursing the infant Horus are considered possible influences on early depictions of the Virgin Mary with Jesus. Osiris was the god of the afterlife, resurrection, agriculture, and the dead, and his myth became the single most influential story in all of Egyptian religion. He was depicted as a mummiform figure with green or black skin representing fertility and the Nile's rich soil, wearing the Atef crown and holding a crook and flail. As Egypt's first divine king, he taught humanity agriculture and civilization, but his jealous brother Seth murdered him and dismembered his body, scattering the pieces across Egypt. Isis reassembled them and briefly revived him. after which Osiris descended to the underworld to rule as its eternal king and judge. Every pharaoh who died was said to become Osiris, while the living pharaoh was identified with his son Horus, making this myth the theological foundation of Egyptian kingship for 3,000 years. In the judgment hall of the dead, it was Osiris who presided over the weighing of the heart ceremony, and those who passed entered the eternal paradise of the field of reeds. Nephthys, whose name meant Lady of the House, was the youngest child of Geb and Nut, sister to Osiris, Isis, and Seth, and wife to Seth, though her true loyalties lay entirely with her siblings. She was the goddess of mourning, death, protection of the dead, and the night, and she served as the dark mirror of her sister Isis. Where Isis represented birth and life, Nephthys represented death and decay. When Seth killed and dismembered Osiris, Nephthys turned against her own husband and joined Isis in collecting the scattered pieces of Osiris's body, wrapping each fragment in linen and helping to resurrect him. In Egyptian funerary tradition, Isis and Nephthys always appeared together as the two divine mourners at either end of the coffin, and professional mourning women at Egyptian funerals were called the Hawks of Nephthys. Note, some later sources describe Nephthys as the mother of Anubis by Osiris, but Anubis as a deity predates both Nephthys and the Osirian cult. His parentage was rewritten retroactively to fit the later mythology. Set was the god of the desert, storms, chaos, and foreign lands, depicted with the head of an unidentified mythological creature known as the Set animal, with a long curved snout and square ears that no known species fully matches. His role in Egyptian religion was deeply ambivalent. He was both the murderer of Osiris and the essential defender of Ra, standing at the prow of the sun god's bark every night to fight off the serpent Apep with a spear, preventing the destruction of the sun. In the Osiris myth, Set killed his brother, dismembered the body, and scattered the pieces across Egypt. He then seized the throne until Horus, son of Osiris, defeated him in a long conflict decided before the Council of Gods. His reputation shifted dramatically over Egyptian history. In the Old and Middle Kingdoms, he was a respected, even royal god, with pharaohs like Seti I bearing his name. But after Egypt's conquest by foreign powers in the first millennium before the Common Era, he became increasingly vilified as a symbol of chaos and invasion, and his image was erased from many monuments. Note: Set's animal remains unidentified. Proposed candidates include aardvark, fennec fox, and saluki dog, but no consensus exists among Egyptologists. Horus was the falcon-headed god of the sky and kingship, one of the oldest and most important deities in all of Egyptian religion, with evidence of his worship stretching back to the pre-dynastic period around 5,500 before the Common Era. His right eye was the sun, and his left eye was the moon, and when he flew across the sky as a great falcon, the sun and moon traveled with him. As the son of Osiris and Isis, his entire existence was defined by a single purpose: to avenge his father's murder and reclaim the throne of Egypt from his uncle Seth. Their long conflict, recorded in a text known as the Contendings of Horus and Seth, involved battles, legal disputes before the Council of Gods, and contests of endurance. During the fighting, Seth tore out one of Horus's eyes, and Horus damaged Seth's testicles, and Thoth eventually restored the eye, which became the famous Eye of Horus symbol of protection and healing. Every living pharaoh was identified as Horus. Every dead pharaoh became Osiris, and the king's official Horus name, written in the royal Serek, was the most important of all his royal titles, making Horus the theological cornerstone of Egyptian kingship for over 3,000 years. Wepwawet was one of Egypt's oldest gods, older even than Anubis, with whom he is frequently confused, a jackal or wolf deity whose name means "opener of the ways," a title that worked on 3 simultaneous levels. He opened the way for the pharaoh's armies in battle, opened the path through the underworld for the souls of the dead, and opened the way at the moment of birth itself. His cult center was Asiut in Upper Egypt, a city the Greeks renamed Lycopolis, city of wolves in his honor, and his image atop a military standard was the first banner carried before Egyptian armies and royal processions, always leading the way. The pyramid texts describe him as born at the sacred shrine of Wadjet, and as a companion of the pharaoh from the earliest dynasties. "My face is that of Wepwawet," declares one spell, linking the king directly to the god's pathfinding power. He stood at the prow of Ra's solar bark, guiding it through the darkness of the underworld each night, and presided over the said festival, the pharaoh's jubilee of renewal held after 30 years of rule, opening the ritual that rejuvenated the king's divine power. Though often confused with Anubis due to his jackal appearance, Wepwawet was distinctly a scout and a vanguard, rather than a guardian of the dead, a god who does not wait at the threshold but charges through it first. Note: whether Wepwawet's sacred animal is a jackal or a wolf remains debated among Egyptologists. Ancient sources use both, and the African wolf species, Canis lupester, may have been the actual animal depicted, blurring the distinction entirely. Anubis was the jackal-headed god of embalming, mummification, and the protection of the dead, one of the oldest deities in the Egyptian pantheon, with depictions on tomb walls dating back to the first dynasty around 3100 before the Common Era. The Egyptians chose the jackal as his symbol because jackals were scavengers seen prowling around burial sites, and by making the jackal divine, they sought to transform that threat into a protector. In the Old Kingdom, he was the supreme lord of the dead, but when the Osiris cult rose to dominance, he was reassigned as a supporting deity, credited with performing the first mummification on the body of Osiris himself. In funerary art, he is most often shown kneeling beside the golden scales in the Hall of Truth, holding the heart of the deceased against the feather of Maat, a role that made him the divine gatekeeper between the living and the eternal. Priests who performed mummification wore jackal masks to invoke his presence, and the opening of the mouth ceremony, which restored the senses of the dead for the afterlife, was performed under his name. Note: his parentage varies across sources. Earlier texts name Ra as his father, while later Osirian mythology names Osiris or Nephthys as parents, reflecting how his origin story was rewritten as Osiris grew more dominant. Ammit was not a goddess, but a composite demoness part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, the three most lethal animals known to ancient Egyptians who crouched beside the scales in the Hall of Two Truths, waiting to devour the hearts of the unworthy dead. Her name means Devourer of the Dead, and her role in the weighing of the heart ceremony was the most terrifying concept in Egyptian theology. If a soul's heart was heavier than the feather of Maat, weighed down by a life of wrongdoing, Ammit consumed it, condemning that person to a second death, a total annihilation of the soul with no afterlife, no rebirth, no existence whatsoever. Unlike every other deity in the Egyptian pantheon, Ammit was never worshipped and had no temples. She was purely feared, and that fear was intentional, functioning as Egypt's ultimate moral enforcer, ensuring that the living conducted themselves according to the principles of Ma'at. Interestingly, the Egyptians buried their dead with copies of the Book of the Dead, containing spells specifically designed to prevent the heart from speaking against its owner, meaning Ammit was perpetually hungry, perpetually waiting, her jaws forever open by the scales of divine justice. Apis was not a mythological creature, but a real, living bull selected by priests to serve as the earthly embodiment of the god Ptah in Memphis, making him one of the most unusual figures in the entire Egyptian pantheon. The chosen bull had to possess a specific set of sacred markings: a white triangular shape on the forehead, a vulture outline on its back, a scarab mark under its tongue, and double hairs on its tail. Once identified, the bull was housed in a palace near the great temple of Ptah, fed the finest food, given a harem of cows, and used as an oracle whose movements were interpreted as divine prophecy. When an Apis bull died, the entire nation went into mourning. The body was mummified with royal honors and buried in a massive stone sarcophagus in the underground Serapeum at Saqqara, and priests were immediately dispatched to search Egypt for his successor. In death, the Apis merged with Osiris to become Osiris Apis, and during the Ptolemaic period, this fusion evolved into Serapis, a new composite deity designed to bridge Egyptian and Greek religion. Khepri was the Egyptian god of the rising sun, self-creation, and rebirth, representing the precise moment each morning when the sun emerged from the underworld and crossed the eastern horizon. His name comes directly from the Egyptian verb kiper, meaning to come into existence or to become, making him not just a god of sunrise, but of existence itself coming into being. The Egyptians drew a vivid parallel between Khepri and the scarab dung beetle. Just as the beetle appeared to roll a ball of dung across the ground, mirroring the sun moving across the sky, and new beetles seemed to emerge spontaneously from inert matter, Khepri embodied the mystery of life arising from nothing. He was considered one of three aspects of the sun god Ra: Khepri at dawn, Ra at midday, and Atum at dusk. And unlike most gods, he had no dedicated temple or priesthood of his own, existing instead as a cosmic force woven into virtually every temple in Egypt. The scarab amulet became one of the most widespread symbols in the ancient world precisely because of Khepri. Worn by the living for protection, placed on the hearts of the dead during mummification, and buried in tombs from Egypt to the far edges of the Mediterranean to ensure rebirth in the afterlife. Sobek was the divine personification of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, and one of the most cosmically significant goddesses in the Egyptian pantheon. As early as the first dynasty, she was called the bringer of the new year and the Nile flood. Because after 70 days of invisibility, Sirius reappeared on the eastern horizon at dawn each July, and within days the Nile would begin to rise. This precise astronomical event anchored the entire Egyptian calendar. The heliacal rising of Sobek marked the opening of the year, triggered the flood season, and determined the agricultural cycle on which Egyptian civilization depended. The 70 days Sirius was absent from the sky were not coincidental. They matched exactly the 70 days of mummification, linking Sobek to death, rebirth, and the journey of the soul. She was depicted as a woman with a 5-pointed star on her crown, and her husband was Sa, the constellation Orion, who preceded her across the sky, just as Osiris was said to precede Isis. A parallel so perfect that by the Middle Kingdom, Sobek was almost entirely merged with Isis, with Sa becoming Osiris and their son Sopdu becoming Horus. The Sothic cycle. The 1,460-year period before her heliacal rising, realigned with the civil calendar, became one of the primary tools modern Egyptologists use to date ancient Egyptian history. Note: Sobek's relationship to Osiris varies across texts. The pyramid texts describe her as his daughter, while later mythology positions her as his celestial counterpart through her identification with Isis, making her simultaneously daughter and spouse equivalent of the same deity depending on the source. Hapi was the god of the annual Nile flood, and in a civilization built entirely on that flood, this made him arguably the most essential deity in the Egyptian pantheon, the one whose favor meant the difference between feast and famine for the entire nation. Every year when the floodwaters rose, Egyptians called the event the arrival of Hapi, celebrated it with festivals, and cast offerings into the river at sacred sites along the banks. His iconography was deliberately androgynous. a bearded male figure with full breasts and a rounded belly, blue or green skin, mirroring the river's colors, and lotus or papyrus plants on his head depending on whether he represented Upper or Lower Egypt. He was even depicted as twin gods, Hap-Reset and Hap-Met, one for each half of the kingdom. Despite being called Father of the Gods in some hymns, and despite being worshipped across the entire country, Hapi had no dedicated temples, only open-air shrines at turbulent stretches of the river near Aswan, where priests measured flood levels and threw offerings into the current. The hymn to Hapi, one of Egypt's oldest surviving literary texts, captures just how terrifying his absence was. When the flood failed, it read, "Everyone was orphaned and millions perished." Note, Hapi should not be confused with Hapi, one of the four sons of Horus, a funerary deity depicted with the head of a baboon, who is a completely different god with an identical name in English transliteration. Thoth, whose Egyptian name Jehuti means "he who is like the ibis," was the god of the moon, wisdom, writing, magic, science, and time, making him one of the most intellectually vast deities in the entire Egyptian pantheon. He was credited with inventing hieroglyphics, the calendar, mathematics, medicine, and music, and every Egyptian scribe kept an image of him in their workspace as patron of their craft. Depicted as an ibis-headed man or a baboon, both animals associated with the moon and intelligence, he stood beside Ra on the solar bark and served as the divine scribe in the Hall of Truth, recording the verdict when hearts were weighed against Ma'at's feather. His most famous mythological act was gambling with the moon itself, winning enough light to add 5 extra days to Egypt's 360-day calendar, the 5 days on which Nut was finally able to give birth to Osiris, Horus the Elder, Set, Isis, and Nephthys. The Greeks so closely identified him with their own Hermes that they renamed his cult city Hermopolis and merged the two into Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great Hermes, whose name became the foundation of an entire mystical tradition that influenced Western occultism for 2,000 years. Note: Thoth's parentage varies across sources, sometimes self-created, sometimes born from Ra's lips, sometimes emerging from Set's skull, reflecting the typical Egyptian pattern of parallel local theologies coexisting without contradiction. Seshat, whose name literally means female scribe, was the goddess of writing, measurement, architecture, record-keeping, and the keeper of Egypt's institutional memory. One of the oldest deities in the pantheon, attested as far back as the Second Dynasty, around 2890 before the Common Era. She is the only female figure in all of Egyptian art, shown in the actual act of writing, depicted in a leopard skin dress with a distinctive 7-pointed star emblem above her head, holding the notched palm rib that symbolized the counting of years in the pharaoh's reign. Her most sacred ritual was the stretching of the cord, where she stood beside the king at the founding of every new temple, using knotted ropes aligned to the stars to fix the building's axis on the earth with astronomical precision. Nothing was built without her. Every military victory, foreign tribute, cattle census, and royal jubilee passed through her hand before becoming official history, for the Egyptians believed an event only gained permanence when Seshat inscribed it. Like Hapi and Khepri, she had no dedicated temples of her own. Her worship was embedded directly in practice, in every inscription carved, every wall measured, and every record kept. Yet as Thoth's influence grew over centuries, he gradually absorbed many of her roles, leaving her as one of Egypt's most foundational but under-recognized deities. Note, her relationship to Thoth varies, wife, daughter, or sister depending on the source, a typical reflection of parallel local traditions. Neith is among the oldest deities in the entire Egyptian record, with evidence of her worship dating to around 3600 before the Common Era in the pre-dynastic period, making her older than the pharaonic state itself. and her name appearing on objects associated with the very first dynasties, including queens who named themselves in her honor. She began as a goddess of war and hunting, depicted with 2 crossed arrows over a shield as her emblem, earning the title Mistress of the Bow, Ruler of Arrows, and she was the patron of the city of Sais in the western Nile Delta, where the red crown of Lower Egypt was sacred to her. Over millennia, her domain expanded dramatically. She became a cosmic creator goddess who, in the Esna Temple's creation account, emerged from the primordial waters, spoke the world into existence, and gave birth to Ra, described at her temple in Sais with the inscription, "I am all that has been, that is, and that will be," as well as a weaving goddess who was said to reweave the fabric of existence daily on her loom. She was so universally respected for her wisdom and impartiality that in the myth of the contendings of Horus and Set, the Divine Council wrote to Neith specifically to adjudicate who should rule Egypt, and she ruled in favor of Horus. In the afterlife, she stood as one of 4 protective goddesses alongside Isis, Nephthys, and Serket, guarding the canopic jars of the dead, and the Greeks so closely identified her with Athena that Plato himself wrote of her temple at Sais as the house of the same goddess they worshipped in Athens. Sobek was the crocodile god of the Nile, one of Egypt's oldest and most widely worshipped deities, first attested under King Narmer in the First Dynasty, and eventually spreading to 52 cult centers across the country. The son of Neith, he embodied the terrifying duality of the Nile itself. His epithets include "he who loves robbery" and "pointed of teeth." Yet this same ferocity made him a protector of pharaohs, a god of fertility, and eventually a cosmic creator when he merged with Ra to become Sobek, Ra described in hymns as having formed the Nile from his own sweat. The Fayum region was his sacred heartland, where living crocodiles adorned with gold jewelry were kept in temple pools as his earthly incarnations, mummified with full divine honors upon death. The city of Sheddet became so associated with him that the Greeks renamed it Crocodilopolis. His connection to royal power was absolute. Kings of the 12th dynasty embedded his name in their own as Sobekotep. The first confirmed female pharaoh named herself Sobekneferu, the beauty of Sobek, and the pyramid texts describe the pharaoh directly as Sobek himself. In myth, he rescued the 4 sons of Horus from the primordial waters, assisted Isis at the birth of Horus, and joined Ra's solar bark to fight Apep each night, transforming Egypt's most dangerous predator into the guardian of cosmic order. Note, Sobek's paternity varies across sources. Some texts name Set as his father, while others present him solely as the son of Neith, born without a male partner. Khnum was the ram-headed creator, god worshipped from the First Dynasty onward, as the divine potter who shaped every human body, and their Ka, or life force, on his potter's wheel from the clay of the Nile, placing them fully formed into their mother's womb before birth. He was the lord of the first cataract at Elephantine Island near Aswan, where the Egyptians believed the Nile emerged from a sacred cave in the earth, making him the gatekeeper of the river's annual flood. His priests monitored Nile levels on stone gauges, and the famine stela recounts that when 7 consecutive years of drought devastated Egypt under King Djoser, the crisis was resolved by appeasing Khnum, who then promised to release the waters once more. He was depicted as a man with a ram's head, the ram being the Egyptian word ba, also meaning soul, which linked him to the spiritual dimension of every living being, and his role was so fundamental that the great pyramid builder, Khufu's full name was Khnum Khufu, meaning Khnum is my protector. At Elephantine, he formed a divine triad with his wife Satet and daughter Anuket, while temple hymns at Esna credit him not just with shaping humans, but with creating all gods, animals, and languages, and fashioning the first egg from which the sun was born. His creative role extended even to the pharaoh. The Temple of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahari depicts Khnum modeling the future queen and her ka simultaneously on his wheel, breathing life into both. Satet, also spelled Satis, was an Upper Egyptian goddess whose name means "she who shoots forth," a reference both to her role as a divine archer and to the annual flood bursting from the Nile's first cataract at Elephantine, where she was worshipped as the third member of the Elephantine triad alongside her husband Khnum and their daughter Anuket. She is one of Egypt's oldest goddesses, first attested in the pyramid texts, where she is described purifying the dead pharaoh with 4 jars of sacred water from Elephantine, and her temple on the island was among the principal holy places in all of Egypt. She guarded Egypt's dangerous southern border with Nubia, using her bow and arrows, killing enemies of the pharaoh, making her simultaneously a goddess of fertility, protection, water, and war. Her connection to the flood was woven into myth through the story of the Night of the Teardrop. Each year, Isis would shed a single tear of grief for the dead Osiris, which Satet caught in her sacred jars and poured into the Nile, setting off the annual inundation that sustained Egyptian civilization. She was also closely associated with the star Sirius, called Sopdet by the Egyptians, whose reappearance in the night sky after 70 days of absence precisely announced the coming of the flood, linking Satet to one of the most carefully observed astronomical events in the Egyptian calendar. Wadjet, whose name means the green one, referring to both the color of the papyrus plant, sacred to Lower Egypt, and the color of the cobra, is one of Egypt's oldest goddesses, with origins in the pre-dynastic period before the pharaonic state existed, when she served as the local protector of the Nile Delta city of Per Wadjet, later called Buto by the Greeks. She became the patron goddess of all of Lower Egypt, depicted as a rearing Egyptian cobra ready to strike, and her image coiled atop the pharaoh's crown became the uraeus, the single most recognizable symbol of Egyptian royal authority, signifying that any enemy approaching the king would be met by divine fire and venom. When Upper and Lower Egypt unified under a single pharaoh, Wadjet paired with Nekhbet, the vulture goddess of Upper Egypt, to form the Nebti, or two ladies. The cobra and the vulture together on the royal crown announced that the king ruled both halves of the kingdom under divine protection. In mythology, she was the Eye of Ra sent to find his lost children Shu and Tefnut, and as a reward, Ra placed her on his own forehead as his eternal protector, an origin story that directly explains the uraeus's placement above the pharaoh's eyes. She also protected the infant Horus in the Delta swamps when Isis fled from Set, serving as his nurse and guardian. Nekhbet, whose name means she of Nekheb, was the great white vulture goddess of Upper Egypt, one of the oldest deities in the Egyptian record, with origins in the pre-dynastic period at the city of Nekheb on the west bank of the Nile, where Egypt's oldest known oracle shrine was located, and where her priestesses, called Mu or mothers, wore robes of actual vulture feathers. The Egyptians chose the vulture for her because they observed that griffin vultures are exclusively female in appearance, never showing visible differences between male and female, leading them to believe the vulture was a self-sufficient mother who needed no male partner, making her a perfect symbol of independent, fierce maternal protection. She was most often depicted as a white vulture hovering with wings fully spread above the pharaoh, grasping the Shen ring, the symbol of eternal encircling protection, in her talons, watching over him in battle, at coronation, during jubilee festivals, and from the moment of his divine birth. Alongside her counterpart Wadjet the cobra, she formed the iconic two ladies or Nebti, the pair of tutelary goddesses whose joint image on the royal crown declared that the pharaoh ruled all of unified Egypt under divine guardianship. In late funerary texts, she carries the extraordinary epithet Father of Fathers, Mother of Mothers, who has existed from the beginning and is creatrix of this world, a reminder that even a regional protective goddess could carry the full weight of cosmic creation in Egyptian theology. Serket, also spelled Serket or Selket, was the ancient Egyptian scorpion goddess whose name means she who causes the throat to breathe, a title that captures her essential paradox. The scorpion's sting paralyzes and stops breath, but Serket was the one who could reverse that suffocation and restore life. She is one of Egypt's oldest deities, attested from the first dynasty onward, and was particularly important to the early scorpion kings of the pre-dynastic period, who named themselves after her. She was depicted as a beautiful woman with a scorpion balanced atop her head, its stinger notably absent or raised in a non-threatening pose, symbolizing protection rather than attack, with her arms outstretched in an eternal gesture of sheltering. Like Isis, Nephthys, Neith, and Wadjet before her, she was one of the 4 great protective goddesses who guarded the canopic jars of the dead, specifically watching over the jar containing the intestines, working alongside the falcon-headed son of Horus, Khebes-Neuf. Her priests and priestesses, called Kerep Serket, meaning controllers of Serket, were Egypt's physicians specializing in venomous bites and stings, blending practical medicine with magical incantation. The recently discovered tomb of the chief palace physician Teti-Nebefu at Saqqara, found in January 2025, explicitly identifies him as conjurer of the goddess Serket. In myth, she sent 7 magical scorpions to guard Isis and the infant Horus as they fled through the delta swamps from Set, and in the underworld she bound the great chaos serpent Apep himself to protect Ra's solar bark on its nightly journey. Anuket, whose name means the embracer or she who clasps, likely referring to the river's waters embracing the land during the annual flood, was the youngest member of the Elephantine Triad, daughter of Khnum and Satet, and the goddess of the turbulent first cataract of the Nile where Egypt's border with Nubia began. She was originally a Nubian deity absorbed into the Egyptian pantheon, and her tall crown of ostrich feathers and reeds sets her distinctly apart from native Egyptian goddesses, directly reflecting her foreign origin. The Egyptians called her the Nubian and Mistress of Nubia. As the goddess of the cataract's swift rushing waters, she was worshipped by traders, sailors, and farmers who depended on safe passage through the dangerous rocky narrows near Aswan, and many left inscriptions on the surrounding rocks as prayers for safe return. Her annual festival, held when the flood began, was one of Egypt's more joyful celebrations. People threw gold, jewels, and precious objects into the Nile as offerings, and fish that were normally forbidden to eat were permitted as a sacred exception during her feast days. Like her mother Sated, she bore the title Eye of Ra, and suckled the pharaoh during the New Kingdom, representing the divine nourishment flowing directly from the life-giving river into the body of the king. Remember that hall of silence where we began, the scale, the feather, the heart. Now you know the name of the creature waiting in the shadows. Now you know the judge who held the balance, the scribe who recorded the verdict, and the king of the dead who ruled beyond it. 47 gods and goddesses. An entire universe explained through a single divine bloodline. The sun that rose each morning was a god sailing across the sky. The river that fed millions was a god weeping tears of life. Even the silence before creation had a name. For 3,000 years, no civilization on Earth answered the great questions of existence with more imagination, more beauty, or more terror than ancient Egypt. If this journey held you until this final moment, then you belong here. Subscribe to Splinters of Time and turn on the bell, because history is full of doors that were never opened, and we intend to open every single one of them.